Hello, in this lesson we are going to learn about what the chart wheel is because we're soon going to start interpreting the chart wheel. And before we get into the details of chart interpretation, let's go over what it is we are looking at. Now this video is lesson 5 in a course on the introduction to vibrational astrology, but you don't have to be going through the lessons in order. You can just jump right into this video. This video stands on its own as well. So here is a chart wheel, the kind that's used in Western astrology. In Vedic astrology, there are other styles that are used. There are different ways of showing where the planets are. In vibrational astrology, we do use a Western style chart wheel. So let's look at this thing and get a sense of what it is that we're looking at before we get into the interpretations. And there are some things here that if you're already an intermediate or advanced level in astrology, you know a lot of this, but I think there'll be a few surprises along the way as well. Okay, number one, we look at this chart wheel. This happens to be for the singer Madonna, who was born at 7:05 a.m. on August 16, 1958 in Bay City, Michigan. Well, if we go into the data entry screen, I go to New and View or Edit Chart Data, and I click on this link here to the information about her at astro.com. I can just click on this link and it takes me directly into the website. Let me shrink this a little bit so you can see. There we go. And at the bottom of this website page, it tells me about the source notes. And basically this birth time comes from Lady Gaga's father, and a few other places confirmed it, but it's rated DD, dirty data. The birth certificate has not been obtained. It's word of mouth. So it may be right, it may be wrong. So first point I want to make about the chart wheel is, number one, how accurate is the time? Something to be aware of. Another thing to be aware of is the time zone and observance of daylight saving time information correct? A lot of people assume that their computer software knows absolutely without any doubt whether daylight saving time was observed and what the time zone is. And in over probably 99% of the cases that's true. There are some cases where we actually don't know if daylight saving time was observed in a particular place at a particular time. Believe it or not, it can just not known. Nobody's done the research. I will talk about that more in some future video, possibly in a future course. I don't want to get into all those subtle details right. Well, not so subtle if your chart is actually not for the correct time, because to do the chart accurately, of course, we need to know the time, and we need to know what the time zone was and whether daylight saving time was observed. Okay. But for most people born in modern times in the United States, it's not ambiguous, and for Madonna, it is clear that the time zone was 5 hours west standard time. Excuse me, it means it was Eastern Standard Time when she was born. Maybe Bay City, Michigan is not in Eastern Time today. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But what matters is what it was at that time. Also, in 1958, in August, Bay City, Michigan did not observe DST. But Michigan observes daylight savings time today, but not back in 1958 in that particular town. So these are things to be aware of. You're looking at what was going on at the time the person was born. Okay, so I just want to make these points that are important for you as an astrologer to think about how accurate the information is. In future courses, we're going to dig into this deeper and deeper and look at how much difference it makes to the chart if the birth time is off or there's an error in the time zone or daylight saving time. But for now, I just want you to know that we need to be aware of these things, because that birth chart is assuming that the time is accurate for whatever it is you're looking at, and the time zone and daylight saving time are correct. Okay, so point number 2 here is about the time zone and the daylight saving time. Now, point number 3, what is it that we are looking at? What the heck is this thing? Well, here's what I say about it. Point number 3. This Western style birth chart is a very crude and simplified image of where the planets are in the sky. That's what it is. It's a crude representation of where the planets are in the sky. And the way this representation is done is that east is on your left. Now, right off the bat, if you're new to astrology, there's something weird about that. When you look at a map, you're looking at a map of Europe or, whatever, United States, Africa. Where is east? It's on the right. So on a map, a geography map, east is on the right, but in the astrology chart, it's on the left. How is that happening? Here's the way to understand it. Face south. Where the planets are in the sky depends on what direction you're facing. The astrology chart is done with you facing south. When you stand up and you face south, what is on your left? On your left is east. So this is, like I said, a crude representation of where the planets are in the sky if you face south. Now here's another interesting thing. If you live in the northern hemisphere, you live in Europe, wherever, the planets are always on the south side of the sky. If you're a gardener, you know that. If you're going to grow plants up against your house, you plant them on the south side, not on the north side. If you plant them on the south side, it gets a lot of sun. If you plant them on the north side, it tends to be, the shadow of the house is covering the plants. So the sun and also all of the planets tend to be on the south side of the sky. If you don't believe me, go out at 12 noon, and if you know where north, south, and east and west are, and you look up at the sun, it will not come directly over your head. It will be south. So a lot of times, astrologers will say that the top of the chart is south. Well, that's a northern hemisphere bias. The top of the chart also is south. If you're in the northern hemisphere, that's not true in the southern hemisphere. So what's really accurate is that the top of the chart is above you. It's it looks like it's up. It is up. It's what's above you. So that may come as a surprise because a lot of people learn that the top of the chart is south. No, a better way to think of this is that the left is east. This arrow to the left. This arrow pointing up is, what is it? It's up. To the right is west, and beneath you is below you. Now you might say, well then where is north or south? Okay, it's not that simple. North, south, east, west are 4 directions. How many directions are there for the sky? The sky is all around us. I mean, if you look in the north, you look in the south, you look in the east, west, you look above you, below you, there's sky everywhere. I mean, half of it's hidden below the horizon, but it's everywhere. So you cannot reduce the sky to 4 directions. Okay, so, I'm just trying to make this clear. All right, now, let's look at this a little more closely. Now that we've established that, let's look at the zodiac signs, and then we're going to look at the houses, and then we're going to talk about the ascendant and midheaven. Let's go through these things. What are the zodiac signs? They're taking the sky and dividing it into 12 equal sections. Okay? Now, and the planets are in a circle. So Aries is the first sign. So there's the 30 degrees of Aries. So if we take this beginning point of Aries, and I'll talk later about how this beginning point is determined. We use the tropical zodiac here, how this is determined. But there's a point in the sky that's 0, and then the first 30 degrees we call Aries Next 30 degrees we call Taurus, and so on. Well, let me show you an image of the sky. In the Sirius software, if we go to Maps and we click on Sky Map, we will bring up the sky map. And here's a sky map for Madonna. And what this shows us is where the planets actually are. Let's look at this and relate it back to the chart wheel, because this is a less simplified, a less crude, this is a realistic image of where the planets are in the sky. What we have on the left is what is above you. So on the left is what is above you. On the right is what's below you. This red circle around the outer edge tells me up here that the red is the horizon. That's the horizon. This point that I'm pointing at right now in the center of the circle on the left is directly above you. The point directly above you is called the zenith. So you're learning some terminology. Point directly over your head is the zenith. The direct point directly below your feet is called the nadir, Nadir, and that will be the center point on the wheel on the right side. Now, let's look at where Mercury is. Mercury is overlapping with the star Regulus and the Sun. So this is a little hard to read because they're overlapping. But what we have here is Regulus right on the red. See, that's right on that red outer circle. The Sun is in a little bit. Regulus, the star, there's a few stars. A handful of the largest stars are shown. The Sun, and then Uranus, and then Venus. Well, I want to first mention this. Notice that the planets are all close to this green arc. They're not directly on it. Mercury is a little above. Sun is directly on it. Uranus is almost directly on it. Venus looks like it's right on this green arc. Mars slightly above. And then these planets are below the horizon. They're not visible. So what is on the left side is visible. What's on the right side is invisible, below the horizon. The moon is just a little bit below the horizon and a little bit above the green arc. Jupiter slightly below the green arc, Saturn slightly below. They will always be very close to this arc. Now this arc is actually a circle that's going around us. Just like the horizon is a circle, this is a circle. Bottom line is this: the planets are always on a specific circle, but not exactly on it. What is that circle called? It's called the ecliptic plane. The ecliptic plane, it's the path of the sun. So by definition, the sun is always exactly on it. So the planets waver a little bit above and below the ecliptic plane. That's just a fact of life. It's always that way. Pluto will waver the most off the ecliptic plane. Look at Pluto. It's way down here. It can waver way, way off the ecliptic plane. But the other planets will kind of hug pretty closely to the ecliptic plane. That ecliptic plane, the path of the sun, is the zodiac. That is the zodiac circle. What we've done in astrology is we have removed the entire sky and we have flattened it onto this circle. That's why you can go to a chart wheel and you see just a flat circle. You know, it can be printed on a piece of paper or on your computer screen. It's a flat thing, completely flat. The sky is not flat. Let me show it to you again, because this is critically important for appreciating what we're doing in astrology. Let me go back to this. Let me say it again. We flattened everything. Now, how do we flatten it? We take Mercury, which is up here, and it's a little bit off. It's a little bit off of this zodiac. This is our zodiac. This green thing. That's what astrologers are putting so much emphasis on. And what we do, I call it make-believe. We make believe that Mercury is directly on the zodiac circle. In other words, we use the proper term is project. We project Mercury onto the ecliptic plane. We drop it 90 degrees. Now, Sun, we don't have to move it. Uranus looks like it's almost there. Venus, Mars, we only have to drop it a little bit. Moon, we have to drop it a little bit. Jupiter, push it up just a pinch. So this is Neptune, push it up just a pinch. Say, you have to, like you might say, adjust them because they're not actually on the ecliptic plane. So here's a very interesting point. When you look at your chart wheel, this is not the actual position of Venus, Uranus, and Sun and Pluto. What it is, more specifically, it's the position of Venus projected onto the ecliptic plane. So we don't use the actual positions of planets. We use the positions projected on the ecliptic plane. Okay, so that is what we're looking at. Now, going back to this, I want to show you one more thing. Going back to this is not the frame of reference we use with the horizon around the outside. This is a visual frame of reference of going outside and looking at where the planets are. We're taking this circle, the green circle, which is actually a circle. I can change this so I have the green around the outside, but for now, let's just leave it this way. We're using the green circle, and where this green circle, the zodiac plane, where it intersects, where it connects with the horizon, that's the ascendant. This point right here that I'm pointing at is the ascendant. The ascendant is not usually directly east. So what I said before was a little bit wrong. I said that this arrow is pointing east. Actually, it's not pointing exactly east. The ascendant is not exactly east. It's in the easterly direction, but this is not due east. This is the direction to the ascendant. So I'm just giving you an idea of what the chart wheel is before we get into the interpretation, so you have some idea, and then we'll jump into the interpretation. Just want to cover this a little bit. So this is the ascendant here, right here, where the ecliptic plane intersects the horizon. Now let me show you something else. Let's look at where Uranus is. Uranus is almost exactly east, and it's less than 1/3 towards being over our head. In other words, it's kind of close to the horizon. It's a little bit up in the sky. So each one of these rings is 15 degrees. 15, 30, 45, 60, 75, 90. So it's 15 plus maybe another 10, about 25 degrees. So you can use this sky map to visualize where the planet actually is. Uranus is almost directly east and about 25 degrees above the horizon. Let's do one more example. Let's do Mercury. Mercury is also almost east, and here the bottom is north. Mercury's a little slightly north of east and right on the horizon. It was rising. Just like the sun rises in the morning, Mercury was rising at that moment. And here's another thing I want to show you, which is that you can do what we call a horizon map, and the horizon map shows you the positions of the planets. Remember I said Uranus is slightly north of east? In the horizon map, you go to Settings, Coordinate System, Horizon Map. This lays it out just like the astrology chart, with east on the left, north, south at the top, west at the bottom, and north. Now this is on the horizon, so the top now is south and the bottom is north. And there's Uranus slightly north of due east, and there is Venus slightly south of due east. Let's go back to the map. Where is it? Over here. There's Venus slightly south of due east. So there's Venus in that direction and a little bit towards here and back to the chart wheel. It's 5 degrees slightly south. Let's do one more example. Let's do Neptune way down here. So Neptune is almost halfway between east and north, because I'm looking at a horizon map, about halfway between them. And if I look at the sky map, which shows me where the planets actually are, Neptune is where is Neptune? Neptune is actually below us, and there it is, almost halfway between north and east. But in this chart wheel, I cannot tell how high the planets are in the sky. I can only see where they are in relationship to the horizon. See, the problem with the chart wheel is it's always flat. You cannot see everything. So going back to, oh no, let me show you this. If I look at wheel style C, if I right click and select wheel style C, which has a lot of details, it shows me the altitude of the planets. The altitude is how far the planet is from the horizon. So Neptune is 47 degrees 30 minutes south. South altitude means below the horizon. So let me go over some terminology. What we have here, let me go back to my PowerPoint, is let's summarize some terminology. Now, I have made a series of videos on the astronomy behind astrology, and they go on for hours. And so this is going very fast to review some points to be aware of. If all of this is new to you and it's overwhelming and you're not quite following it, I have the detailed videos on the astronomy behind astrology. It's many hours long, and you can study it step by step. What I'm doing here is giving you a quick introduction to what the chart wheel is. Let's review. Let's pull up a nice simple chart wheel. Here's our chart wheel that we know and love and we will be using from now on. What is it? What is this circle? This is the ecliptic plane around the outside, and this is where the planets are projected on the ecliptic plane. We are ignoring everything else. We're ignoring how close the planet is to the horizon, etc. We're using the projected positions on the ecliptic plane, and we're getting this image. It ends up that this perspective of putting the planets on the ecliptic plane and analyzing them in that way of measuring them works extremely well. And in some other videos that we can have in future courses, and I've made some of them already. I haven't put them into a sequence in courses yet. I get into some of the details of why it makes sense, and it gets connected to ideas in physics and string theory and all kinds of things. But for now, all I want you to know is what is it that you are looking at? This point to the left is the ascendant. What is the ascendant? Do you remember? Maybe not. I might have blown your mind with too much information too quickly. The ascendant is where the zodiac plane, the ecliptic plane, intersects the horizon. The path of the planets is called the ecliptic plane. The sun is always exactly on the ecliptic plane. This is our zodiac. Where this zodiac, which is actually a circle, just like the horizon is a circle, where this circle intersects, where, in other words, crosses the horizon, on the east side, it might be east, it might be way down here towards the north, or way up here towards the south. It can vary a lot, but it's somewhere roughly in the east direction. That point where the ecliptic plane crosses the horizon plane, that's the ascendant. And this point here, where the ecliptic plane crosses the vertical line, it's called the meridian plane. That's the MC. So the ascendant is a point here, and the MC is a point here. And the descendant is the opposite point on the west side, and the IC is the opposite point underneath you, where the ecliptic plane crosses the meridian plane. So all of these things are defined very clearly, very specifically, as astronomical points in space. So that's what the chart wheel is. Let's look at our terminology list again. You now know what zodiac longitude is. Zodiac longitude is the placement of the planet on the ecliptic plane. And the beginning point for zodiac longitude, as many of you may know already, this beginning point, Zero-Aries, is where what we call the vernal equinox is. The vernal equinox. The vernal equinox, this is fascinating. The vernal equinox is the point where the ecliptic plane intersects another plane called the equatorial plane. This yellow curve is the equator of the Earth. So you're familiar with the equator of the Earth, right? I mean, it goes through, Ecuador and South America, etc. That equator of the Earth, you can extend it out into space. With your imagination, you just imagine that equator like extended out into space, and that's what astronomers do and astrologers do, and it's called the equatorial plane. So that's the equatorial plane, and where it intersects the ecliptic plane. Remember, the ecliptic plane is the zodiac circle. That's our zodiac. That creates the Zero-Aries, and where it intersects on the opposite side is Zero-Libra. Interestingly, the ascendant is an intersection point of what we call a great circle, the horizon, the great circle of the horizon. Where the great circle of the horizon intersects the ecliptic plane is the ascendant. Where the meridian plane, another great circle, where it intersects the ecliptic, is the MC. And where the equatorial plane intersects the ecliptic plane is Zero-Aries and Zero-Libra. So astrology is based on an abstract astronomy. I call it abstract. It's an astronomy based on circles, geometric circles. They're not actual physical things. The zodiac is not really a physical thing. The horizon isn't a physical thing. It's a visual thing that humans can imagine and can see, but it's not a physical thing like a planet, or a star. It's a geometry. This is the sacred geometry. There's a geometry behind astrology, the way we measure things, the way we look at things, and very fascinating where these circles, these great circles, which are taking the entire sky and collapsing them into 2 dimensions. You take 3 dimensions, you collapse it into 2 dimensions. They are powerhouses. They are like condensations of the power of the entire sky. And then where 2 of these great circles intersect, it is like a condensation of the power of the entire sky at those points. Okay, so that's what we're looking at when we look at this chart wheel. Let's look at it again. There it is. We're looking at the planets projected onto the ecliptic plane. The ecliptic plane is the zodiac. And we've put east on our left. We put this up here is that midheaven point. And now you know what those are. So I'm giving you, rapid fire. This is like 30 minutes. In 30 minutes, I'm introducing the whole, astronomical and sacred geometric basis of astrology. So it's a lot of material to absorb, and you don't have to remember and understand every detail of what I'm saying. I just want to give you a quick, fly right through it very rapidly sense of what it is we're looking at when we look at the astrology chart. So you have some idea. And again, I have very, very detailed videos and take hours and hours. And we'll have a future course on the astronomy of astrology. I've already got most of those videos made, and I'll put it all together. And you can watch them now as well if you want to get into it. But we want to get into interpretation. I just want to let you have a basic idea of what it is we're looking at. Okay, so we have the sky divided into 12 equal pieces of the zodiac signs. We have the sky also broken up into the 12 houses. The houses are just numbered 1 through 12, whereas the zodiac signs have names, Aries, Taurus. And there are different ways of dividing the sky into 12 houses. In this particular system, some houses are bigger than others. They're not equally sized. There are other systems where the houses are all the same size of 30 degrees. And as you know, there's another zodiac called the sidereal zodiac. So there's different ways of dividing the sky into 12 pieces. Okay, let's review these terms. Well, some of them is not just review, it'll be introduced, just so you've heard them and you've got an idea. All I want to do here is give you, again, I just want to give you a vague general sense of what the astrology chart is. And in the next lesson, we dive right into the interpretation. I'm not going to dwell on all this. I just want to give you a vague sense of it. Number one, you know what zodiac longitude is. That's our tropical zodiac position. That's where the planets are projected onto the ecliptic plane. And it's the 0 point of that is the vernal equinox. That's the beginning. You know, you have a circle, you make a point to be the 0 point to count from. Zodiac latitude, that's the distance from the zodiac plane. So we noticed, for example, that let's look at the sky map. We noticed, for example, that Mercury is pretty far above the ecliptic plane, where Sun, Uranus, and Venus are almost on the ecliptic plane. If we look at a chart wheel, and I'll right click and I'll go to this style C, which has a lot of detail, there's the latitude, and Mercury has a 4 degrees, 41 minute south latitude, so that being above the ecliptic plane was in the south direction. 4.5 degrees, a little more than 4.5 degrees south. Whereas Venus, we noticed, was almost exactly on the ecliptic plane. There it is, only 0 north 19, almost exactly on it. So you can look at the sky map, you can look at this listing, and it will all make sense. So we don't use zodiac latitude in astrology. We ignore it, we just use longitude. Azimuth is a measurement around the circle. So this horizon chart wheel style that we looked at, where the planets are projected onto the horizon to show what direction they're in on the horizon, that's called its azimuth. And how far the planet is from the horizon to being over your head, when a planet is on the horizon, that's called its altitude. So the altitude, when a planet comes directly over your head, its altitude is 90 degrees. Okay, it's good to hear this terminology, so when you come into this again, you'll have some idea. And you've heard the term declination. You'll hear it over and over and over again. But declination is not directly connected to the zodiac plane. It's connected to that equatorial plane. So in some ways, in astrology, we use this other plane, the equatorial plane. So this yellow thing is also used in astrology, where the equatorial plane, also known as the celestial equator, where it intersects the ecliptic plane, is Zero-Aries and Zero-Libra. And astrologers also measure the distance from the equator. I have a video about that. Why do we care what the distance is from the equatorial plane? There's some very interesting things about it. We'll get into that much further into the future. Astrology is such a vast subject that there's so much to learn about and discover. And again, don't feel overwhelmed. You're hearing the terminology if you've never heard it before. If you never had any idea about any of this before, you're learning that there's a lot to astrology. It's not such a simple thing. There's a lot to think about. You're looking at the whole sky and what is it that the chart wheel is. So declination is a distance from the equatorial plane, and right ascension is a measurement along the equatorial plane. That's if this is all new to you, you'll learn more about this in the future. You actually won't learn that much about it. You don't need to know a lot about this to interpret. I just want to give you a quick survey of things so you have some idea of what we're not doing in astrology and what we are doing. Things we look at. I told you what the ascendant is. You now know what the ascendant is. Usually in astrology, people say the ascendant is the sign that's in the east. Well, that's kind of true, but the ascendant more specifically is a point where the ecliptic plane intersects the horizon plane in the easterly direction. If you're following what I'm saying, you are already more sophisticated and more advanced in your understanding of the astronomy behind astrology than probably the majority of astrologers. So if it feels overwhelming, don't worry about it. We're covering a lot of ideas. We learned about what the beginning point of the tropical zodiac is. Tropical Zero-Aries, it's the vernal equinox. And the vernal equinox is where the ecliptic plane and the equatorial plane intersect. We learned what declination is, the distance of a planet from the celestial equator. And we learned that a chart wheel is. What is a chart wheel? It's the projected position of the planets on the ecliptic plane, and east is placed on the left. That's what a chart wheel is. The midheaven, MC for short, is where the ecliptic plane and the meridian plane intersect. You've heard about the moon's nodes, by the way? The north node and south node? Guess what they are? Intersection points. Look at all the things that are intersection points of great circles. The ascendant is the intersection of great circles. Zero-Aries is the intersection of great circles. The midheaven is the intersection of great circles. And the moon's node is the intersection of great circles. The moon's node is where the path of the moon intersects the ecliptic plane. All of these points, the ascendant, Zero-Aries, the midheaven, the moon's node, is where a great circle intersects the ecliptic plane. Okay, I've got a few more terms and then we're done with this video. We know what the zodiac is. You take the ecliptic plane, you divide it into 12 equal pieces, and you give each of the pieces a name. In the tropical zodiac, we use the vernal equinox as a starting point. You know what the houses are. Almost identical to the zodiac, you're again dividing the ecliptic plane into 12 pieces, but instead of starting from the vernal equinox, we're starting with the ascendant. Notice that the zodiac begins at a point that is the intersection of two great circles, and the houses also are the beginning. They begin at the intersection of two great circles. It's fascinating. There's a tremendous consistency here. This cannot be a coincidence. The houses and the zodiac are so extremely similar when you understand what they are. There's not a lot of discussion about this in astrology. I think it's because astrologers have not been that aware of the astronomy behind astrology, behind astrology in modern times. There are many house systems. We'll discuss this in future classes. In general, they start with the ascendant, but there's so many variations. We'll learn more about that in the future. The midheaven in some houses is the 10th house cusp. In other words, the beginning of the 10th house. In other house systems, it isn't. In some house systems, houses are the same size, and in some systems, they're not the same size. All you want to learn today is that astrologers divide the sky into sections. They'll divide it into 12 sections of the zodiac, and we use the tropical zodiac in vibrational astrology, and that leads to our next point. Some astrologers use another zodiac called the sidereal zodiac, which has a different basis for it, which I'm not going to get into right now. We can get into that later. A lot of these things we don't need to understand in great detail because we don't use them in vibrational astrology, but I just want to let you know what the choices are, what different people are doing, and which ones we use in vibrational astrology. And lastly, there's something called a constellational zodiac, where you use the actual constellations. There is a constellation called Aries, a constellation called Taurus. Constellation means group of stars that people give the name Aries to. So there are 3 Aries, 3 Tauruses, 3 Geminis. There's Aries, the tropical sign, Aries, the sidereal sign, and Aries, the constellation. And constellations are not used by most astrologers. Some astrologers do use constellations as well as zodiac signs. And you've heard about this idea of 13 signs, like Ophiuchus is a 13th sign. This comes from the idea that you would have a constellational zodiac, but we don't use the constellational zodiac in vibrational astrology, and that whole idea of a 13th sign is really just not relevant to us because we're not using constellations. We're not interpreting constellations. And it gets confusing because there is a constellation called Taurus, there is a tropical sign called Taurus, there's a sidereal sign called Taurus, and then people make arguments based on the history of astrology, and many of those arguments are based on incorrect information about the history. So we don't need to get into all that. I just want to let you know what the chart wheel is and what it is not. It is not based on constellations. It is not based on stars. It is based on the vernal equinox. It's based on the vernal equinox. So right here in our chart wheel, this beginning of Aries, that's the vernal equinox. What is the vernal equinox? It's the intersection of 2 great circles, the ecliptic plane and the equatorial plane. It's also where the sun is when spring begins in the northern hemisphere and where autumn begins in the southern hemisphere. So, my friends, we have in 42 minutes given you a race through the astronomical basis of what it is we're looking at. I just wanted to do this very quickly. I hope it hasn't confused you by covering so many different ideas so quickly, but don't let it confuse you. Really, if this was new to you and you don't understand a lot of that, no worries. No worries at all. Don't be concerned about it because you can do astrology without understanding all that. I can drive a car without knowing how the transmission works. We're going to get in there. We're going to just start interpreting. Okay? So don't worry if you didn't follow that. It's really not that important. If it's not that important, why did I cover it? The reason is because I thought it was kind of strange that I'm going to go in here and I'm going to say, okay, sun is in the 12th house, and then start giving you these meanings of what the 12th house is that are really not very accurate. I wanted to just give you a fairly good introduction to what the 12th house is. What is it? It is the section of the sky starting at the ascendant. You know what the ascendant is. Heading towards over your head. So it's from the ascendant going up. That's what it is. But you now have a clear idea of what's going on. And also when you start hearing debates about people saying, I want to look at the sky and from a different perspective. Yeah, there are other perspectives that you could consider that might also be useful. Okay. All right. Well, I hope that wasn't too intimidating or daunting and I didn't run through it too fast. In the next video in this course, we are going to start our interpretation. Okay, thank you very much, my friends. God bless. Namaste.